What would you do if you were traveling with your children and airport staff treated you like a criminal simply because of how you looked? What if strangers questioned your right to fly first class not because of your ticket, but because of your skin color? At Denver International Airport on a busy Thursday morning, one mother stood calmly at the check-in counter while chaos erupted around her. The staff called for security. Other passengers stared and whispered. Phones began recording as the situation spiraled out of control. But what nobody in that terminal knew was this. The woman they were humiliating was married to one of the most powerful military commanders in the United States Army. And when he walked through those sliding glass doors, Denver International Airport buzzed with the familiar chaos of Thursday morning travel. Business executives wheeled leather briefcases past families juggling strollers and suitcases. The towering white peaks of the terminal's distinctive architecture caught the early Colorado sunlight, casting long shadows across the polished floors where thousands of travelers began their journeys every day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At Gate C42, the first-class check-in counter for Apex Airlines stood like a fortress of exclusivity. The burgundy-rope barriers, marble-topped counter, and uniformed staff created an invisible boundary between those who belonged and those who did not. Behind that counter, 3 airline employees processed the elite passengers who could afford premium seats and expected premium treatment. Angela Washington stood calmly in the first-class line, her 2 children beside her. At 34, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the exhaustion that comes with managing an 8-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter through the complexities of air travel. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple navy dress that was professional but not flashy. Her children, Marcus Jr. and Sophia, were well-behaved despite the early morning hour, their small rolling suitcases positioned beside them like perfect soldiers. The woman working the first-class counter was named Beverly Patterson, a 15-year veteran of airline customer service who prided herself on maintaining standards. At 47, Beverly had developed strong opinions about who belonged in first class and who was probably trying to game the system. She wore her authority like armor, her burgundy uniform pressed to perfection, her platinum hair styled in a way that suggested both professionalism and judgment. Beverly glanced up as Angela approached the counter, her smile faltering slightly as she took in the scene. A black woman with 2 children, no visible designer luggage, no obvious signs of wealth. Beverly's trained eye scanned for the usual markers of first-class passengers, expensive jewelry, designer handbags, the confident bearing of those accustomed to privilege. She saw none of these things. Angela placed her boarding passes on the marble counter with a gentle smile. "Good morning. We're checking in for the 10:30 flight to Atlanta." Beverly picked up the boarding passes with visible reluctance, her eyes widening as she read the seat assignments. 2A, 2B, and 2C. First class. Front row. The most expensive seats on the aircraft. Beverly's expression shifted from professional courtesy to skeptical concern. "Ma'am, are you sure these are your boarding passes? Sometimes the kiosk machines malfunction and print the wrong seat assignments." Angela's smile remained patient. "I'm quite sure. I booked these seats myself 3 weeks ago." Behind Angela, the first-class line was growing longer. A businessman in an expensive suit tapped his Rolex impatiently. An elderly woman in pearls shifted her weight from one designer shoe to the other. The exclusive atmosphere of the first-class check-in area seemed to pulse with the rhythm of wealth and expectation. Beverly stared at her computer screen, typing with sharp, deliberate keystrokes. The reservation appeared exactly as Angela had stated. Washington, Angela, 3 passengers, first-class seats, 2A, 2B, and 2C, paid in full 6 months ago. But Beverly's suspicion only deepened. "Ma'am, I need to see photo identification for all passengers," Beverly announced, her voice carrying across the terminal with unnecessary volume. Angela reached into her purse and produced 3 identification documents: her driver's license, Marcus Jr.'s school ID, and Sophia's birth certificate. Beverly examined each document with the intensity of a detective investigating fraud. "These seats were quite expensive," Beverly said, holding Angela's driver's license up to the light as if checking for counterfeits. "Are you sure you understand the price difference between economy and first class?" Her children looked up at their mother with confusion. They had never witnessed their mother being questioned like this, never seen adults treat her with such obvious disrespect. Marcus Jr. tugged at his mother's dress, whispering, "Mama, why is she being mean to you?" Angela placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. The nice lady is just doing her job." But everything was not fine. The businessman behind them was growing more agitated, checking his phone and muttering about delays. The elderly woman had begun complaining loudly about the holdup. Other passengers in the general boarding area were starting to notice the commotion at the first-class counter. Beverly continued her interrogation. "Do you have a credit card that matches this reservation? I need to verify payment method." Angela produced her American Express Platinum card, the distinctive metal catching the terminal lighting. Beverly examined it as if she had never seen such a card before, comparing the name to the driver's license multiple times. "This is highly irregular," Beverly announced to no one in particular. "We need to follow proper verification procedures for first-class passengers." What was regular about this situation was not Beverly's concern for airline security, but her inability to reconcile what she was seeing with her preconceptions. A black woman with 2 children simply did not fit her mental image of first-class passengers. In Beverly's 15 years behind this counter, first class had meant white executives, wealthy retirees, and the occasional celebrity. It had never meant a young mother who looked like she might be more comfortable in the back of the plane. Beverly picked up her desk phone and dialed an extension. "Tom, I need a supervisor at the first-class counter. We have a situation that needs additional verification." The word "situation" carried across the terminal like a dropped bomb. Passengers began turning their attention to the drama unfolding at the prestigious counter. Some pulled out phones, not yet recording, but ready to capture whatever happened next. Angela remained perfectly calm, her hand still resting protectively on her son's shoulder. She had faced this kind of scrutiny before, in department stores, restaurants, and hotel lobbies. She knew the drill. Stay calm, stay dignified. Don't give them any reason to escalate their suspicions into something worse. Tom Hendricks, the gate supervisor, arrived at the counter within minutes. At 55, Tom had seen every kind of airline drama imaginable, but he trusted Beverly's judgment. If she said there was a situation, there was a situation. "What seems to be the problem, Beverly?" Beverly leaned close to Tom, lowering her voice, but not quite enough for Angela to hear. "This passenger claims to have 3 first-class seats, but something doesn't seem right. The credit card matches, the ID matches, but you know how it is with fraud these days." Tom looked at Angela and her children, his expression shifting from neutral professionalism to cautious suspicion. "Ma'am, we're going to need to run some additional verification on your reservation. This'll just take a few minutes." Angela glanced at the boarding time on her ticket. "We have 45 minutes until boarding begins. Is there a problem with our reservation?" Tom and Beverly exchanged glances. "Not a problem exactly," Tom replied, "but we want to make sure everything is in order. First-class passengers expect a certain level of service, and we need to maintain our standards." The line behind Angela had grown to 8 people, all of whom were witnessing this unprecedented security theater. The businessman had started making calls, complaining about delays. The elderly woman was demanding to speak to a manager. The atmosphere around the first-class counter had shifted from exclusive luxury to barely controlled chaos. Beverly typed furiously at her computer, accessing screens that had nothing to do with Angela's reservation. She was buying time, hoping that closer inspection would reveal some flaw in the documentation, some proof that her instincts were correct. Tom stood with his arms crossed, watching Angela's every movement as if she might bolt for the gate at any moment. The 2 children sensed the growing tension, moving closer to their mother's side. "Mama?" Sophia whispered. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Angela replied quietly. "We're not in trouble. We're just waiting." But Angela Washington was not just a mother traveling with her children. What Beverly Patterson and Tom Hendricks did not know, what none of the witnesses gathering around the first-class counter could have imagined, was that Angela was married to General Michael Washington, the youngest black general in United States Army history. General Washington commanded the 82nd Airborne Division, one of the most elite units in the American military. His security clearance was higher than most senators. His authority extended across multiple continents. He had advised presidents on matters of national security and had the direct phone numbers of Pentagon officials who shaped American military policy. And at this very moment, General Washington was walking through the sliding glass doors of Denver International Airport, expecting to meet his wife and children for a family vacation that had taken months to coordinate around his military obligations. Angela glanced toward the main entrance, wondering if her husband's flight from Fort Bragg had arrived early. She had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would transform not only their travel plans, but the careers of everyone standing behind that burgundy rope. The reckoning was walking through the terminal doors, and it wore the uniform of the United States Army. While Beverly Patterson and Tom Hendricks huddled over their computer screens, pretending to investigate Angela's perfectly legitimate reservation, the situation at the first-class counter was attracting unwanted attention from every corner of the terminal. What had begun as routine discrimination was evolving into a public spectacle. Jennifer Walsh, a frequent business traveler from Chicago, stood third in line behind Angela. At 42, Jennifer had witnessed enough corporate politics to recognize injustice when she saw it. She pulled out her phone and began recording discreetly, her thumb hovering over the live stream button on her Instagram account. Her 8,000 followers included several civil rights activists and journalists who would be very interested in what was unfolding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Behind Jennifer, the line had grown to 12 passengers, all of whom had paid premium prices for the privilege of expedited check-in. Their patience was evaporating as quickly as their goodwill toward Apex Airlines. The businessman, Richard Kane from New York, had already missed 2 important conference calls. His irritation was becoming vocal. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Richard announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I pay $15,000 a year in airline fees, and I'm standing here watching some security theater about a woman with children. Process her ticket or don't, but stop wasting our time." The elderly woman with pearls, Eleanor Whitman from Boston, had different concerns. She whispered to her companion, Martha, with the kind of volume that indicated she wanted Angela to overhear. "I've been flying first class for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. They're being very thorough. Perhaps there's more to this situation than meets the eye." Angela heard every word. Her children heard every word. Marcus Jr., who had inherited his mother's sharp intelligence along with his father's protective instincts, was beginning to understand that something was terribly wrong. He stepped closer to Angela and spoke in a voice that carried despite his young age. "Mama, why are they being mean to us? We have our tickets. We paid for our seats. Why won't they let us on the plane?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in a child's simple logic. Beverly Patterson's face flushed red, but she doubled down in her performance of due diligence. "Son, we're just making sure everything is correct," Beverly said, with forced sweetness that fooled no one. "Sometimes computers make mistakes, and we want to be sure you have the right seats." Tom Hendricks had spent the last 10 minutes accessing databases that had nothing to do with Angela's reservation. He had checked credit reports, criminal background systems, and even airline security watch lists. Every search came back clean. Angela Washington was exactly who she claimed to be, a law-abiding citizen with an impeccable credit score and no history of airline incidents. But admitting that would require acknowledging that their suspicions were based on nothing more than racial profiling. Instead, Tom decided to escalate the situation by involving airport security. "Beverly, I think we should get TSA involved. This level of scrutiny requires their expertise." The words TSA and security rippled through the first-class line like electricity. Passengers began pulling out phones openly now. Jennifer Walsh started her Instagram live stream, whispering into her phone as she recorded. Something crazy is happening at Denver Airport. They're calling the TSA on a black mom with kids for trying to use first-class tickets she clearly paid for. This is discrimination happening in real time. 2 TSA agents appeared at the counter within minutes. Agent Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for fairness, and Agent Thompson, a newer employee who was still learning to navigate the complex dynamics of airport authority. They had been told there was a potential fraud situation involving first-class tickets. Agent Rodriguez looked at the scene with experienced eyes. A calm woman with 2 well-behaved children, legitimate documentation, and airline staff who seemed more agitated than the supposed perpetrator. His training kicked in immediately. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the TSA. Can you explain what's happening here?" Angela's voice remained steady despite the humiliation of being questioned by federal agents in front of dozens of witnesses. "The airline staff have concerns about my reservation, but I've provided all requested documentation. My children and I are traveling to Atlanta to visit family." Agent Rodriguez examined Angela's driver's license, the children's identification, and the boarding passes. Everything appeared legitimate. He looked at Tom Hendricks with growing skepticism. "What specific concerns do you have about this passenger's documentation?" "Well, the reservation was made some time ago, and we want to ensure there is no fraud involved. These are expensive seats, and we've had issues in the past with stolen credit cards and identity theft." Agent Rodriguez had handled thousands of fraud cases. This wasn't one of them. "Have you run the standard verification protocols?" Beverly jumped in quickly. "We've run every check in our system. Everything appears to be in order, but something just feels off about the situation." The phrase, "something feels off about the situation," was exactly what Agent Rodriguez had been waiting to hear. In his experience, that phrase was code for racial profiling. He had seen it dozens of times, legitimate passengers of color subjected to extra scrutiny because they didn't fit someone's mental image of who belonged in premium seating. Agent Thompson, less experienced and more influenced by the airline staff's apparent certainty, suggested a different approach. "Maybe we should run additional background checks. If they're legitimate passengers, they won't mind the extra security." This was the moment when Jennifer Walsh decided to make the situation public. Her Instagram live stream was showing 847 viewers and climbing. She spoke directly into her phone, her voice carrying across the terminal. "I'm watching TSA agents question a black woman and her children because airline staff don't believe they belong in first class. This is Denver International Airport, and this is happening right now. Share this stream if you think this is wrong." The digital amplification had begun. Within minutes, Jennifer's followers were sharing the stream across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. The hashtags Black Traveling While Black and Denver Airport Discrimination began trending in Colorado and surrounding states. Back at the counter, Agent Rodriguez made a decision that would define his career. "Ma'am, your documentation is completely in order. There's no legitimate security concern here, and we won't be conducting any additional screening." Tom Hendricks stood, stunned. "But Agent Rodriguez, the airline has the right to refuse service if they have concerns about passenger behavior or documentation irregularities." Agent Rodriguez's voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement. "The airline has the right to refuse service for legitimate business reasons. Racial profiling is not a legitimate business reason. This passenger has broken no laws, violated no regulations, and provided all requested documentation." The crowd of witnesses was growing larger. Passengers from other gates had wandered over to see what was causing the commotion. Airport employees from various airlines were watching from their counters. Security cameras mounted throughout the terminal were recording everything. Beverly Patterson realized she was losing control of the situation. She made one final attempt to justify her actions. "We're simply following protocol for high-value transactions.
These seats cost over $4,000. We have a responsibility to our shareholders to prevent fraud." Agent Rodriguez had heard enough. "Ma'am, preventing fraud means verifying documentation, which you've done. Everything checks out. What you're doing now is harassment based on discriminatory profiling." The word discrimination hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Passengers murmured their agreement. Jennifer's live stream was showing over 2,000 viewers. The hashtags were spreading beyond Colorado into national trending topics.
Angela Washington had remained silent throughout this escalating circus, her hands resting protectively on her children's shoulders. But she was not a victim waiting for rescue. She was a military wife who had dealt with discrimination in towns surrounding army bases, in officers' clubs, and in military family housing. She knew how to handle herself in hostile situations. She also knew that her husband's plane from Fort Bragg had landed 20 minutes ago. General Michael Washington was somewhere in this terminal, and when he discovered what was happening to his family, the situation would change dramatically. What none of these people knew was that General Washington carried the kind of security clearance that made airport officials nervous. His military identification would trigger immediate involvement from airport management, federal authorities, and possibly Pentagon liaisons. His presence would transform a local discrimination incident into a potential national security matter. As Angela checked her phone for a text from her husband, she saw a message that made her smile for the first time that morning. "Just landed. Coming to find you and the kids. Can't wait to see you." The general was walking through the terminal, and he was about to discover that his family was being treated like criminals for the crime of flying while black. The involvement of TSA agents had transformed what began as airline discrimination into a federal matter, but it had also exposed the deep systemic failures that allowed such incidents to occur. Within minutes of Agent Rodriguez's declaration that Angela's documentation was legitimate, airport management received an urgent call from the Apex Airlines corporate office in Atlanta. Patricia Morgan, Denver International Airport's terminal operations manager, arrived at gate C-42 with the swift efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis management. At 58, Patricia had handled everything from terrorist threats to celebrity meltdowns, but she had never faced a situation that was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers while federal agents stood witness to potential discrimination. Her first assessment of the scene told her everything she needed to know. A calm black woman with 2 children, surrounded by agitated airline staff, federal agents, and a growing crowd of passengers recording with their phones. This was a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time. Tam Hendricks immediately approached Patricia with the desperate energy of someone whose career was circling the drain. "Patricia, thank God you're here. We have a complex situation involving potential fraud and security concerns with a first-class passenger." Patricia Morgan had not reached her position by accepting the word of panicking subordinates. She looked at Angela, who stood with quiet dignity despite being surrounded by the chaos of official scrutiny. She looked at the 2 children, who were clearly tired and confused, but remarkably well-behaved. She looked at Agent Rodriguez, whose expression suggested he had already reached his own conclusions about this situation. "What specific evidence of fraud have you documented?" Patricia asked Tam directly. Tam's response revealed the weakness of his position. "Well, the passenger's documentation appears to be legitimate, but the circumstances seemed suspicious. A single mother with 2 children in first-class seats, and the reservation was made months ago with a credit limit that seemed inconsistent with her apparent income level." Agent Rodriguez interrupted with the authority of federal law enforcement. "Ma'am, I've reviewed all the documentation. The passenger has committed no violations of federal aviation regulations. The airline's concerns appear to be based on profiling rather than legitimate security issues." Patricia felt her stomach sink. In her decades of airport management, she had seen this scenario play out dozens of times. Well-meaning but biased staff making assumptions about passengers based on appearance, creating incidents that reflected poorly on everyone involved. The difference today was the live audience and the federal witness. Jennifer Walsh's Instagram stream had grown to over 8,000 viewers. Her commentary was sharp and unforgiving. Airport management just arrived, but the damage is already done. This woman and her children have been standing here for 45 minutes being treated like criminals for the crime of flying while black. The hashtags had evolved and multiplied. Denver airport shame was trending nationally. Civil rights organizations were beginning to share the stream. News outlets in Atlanta and Colorado were sending reporters to the airport. Beverly Patterson, realizing that her actions were being scrutinized by her superiors, made one final attempt to justify the unjustifiable. "Patricia, we were simply following enhanced security protocols. In today's environment, we can't be too careful about verifying high-value transactions." Agent Rodriguez had reached his limit with Beverly's justifications. "Ma'am, enhanced security protocols are based on specific threat indicators rather than racial profiling. This passenger exhibited no suspicious behavior, provided all requested documentation, and has been cooperative throughout this unnecessary interrogation." Patricia Morgan made a decision that would define how this incident was remembered. She stepped forward and addressed Angela directly, her voice carrying across the terminal with the authority of airport management. "Mrs. Washington, on behalf of Denver International Airport, I apologize for the treatment you and your children have received today. Your documentation is clearly in order, and there is no legitimate reason for these delays." The apology was sincere, but it was also too late. The damage had been done publicly, and the digital audience was not interested in corporate damage control. Jennifer Walsh continued her live commentary with increasing intensity. "An apology doesn't undo 45 minutes of harassment. An apology doesn't explain why this woman's children had to watch their mother be treated like a criminal. This is systemic discrimination, and one apology from management doesn't fix a broken system." Meanwhile, across the terminal, General Michael Washington had completed his own check-in process for the connecting flight to Atlanta. At 47, General Washington commanded respect through presence rather than volume. His 6'2" frame carried the bearing of a man accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. His military uniform displayed ribbons and commendations that represented 30 years of military service, including combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. His security clearance was so high that his movement through airports triggered automatic notifications to federal authorities. TSA supervisors were alerted when he passed through security. Airport management received updates on his location. His presence in any civilian facility was monitored at the highest levels of Homeland Security. He checked his phone for a message from Angela, expecting to find their gate assignment and boarding information. Instead, he discovered 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and a voicemail from his wife that chilled him to the bone. "Michael, something terrible is happening at the check-in counter. They're questioning our tickets and calling security. The children are scared. Please hurry." General Washington's training kicked in immediately. He identified the terminal map, located gate C-42, and began moving through the crowds with the focused intensity of a combat leader responding to a crisis. His military bearing caused other travelers to step aside instinctively, creating a clear path through the normally congested terminal. Back at gate C-42, the situation had reached a stalemate. Patricia Morgan had apologized, but Tom Hendricks and Beverly Patterson remained convinced they had acted appropriately. Agent Rodriguez was preparing to file a report documenting potential civil rights violations. The crowd of witnesses had grown to over 60 people, many of whom were recording and streaming. Angela Washington checked her phone and saw a new message from her husband. "On my way, 2 minutes out." She looked toward the main terminal entrance and felt the first sense of relief she had experienced all morning. In 2 minutes, the balance of power in this situation would shift dramatically.
In 2 minutes, everyone involved would discover that they had been harassing the family of one of the most powerful military commanders in the United States.
Agent Thompson, the less experienced TSA agent, had been quietly reviewing protocol manuals on his tablet. He looked up with an expression of concern that had nothing to do with Angela's documentation. "Agent Rodriguez, I'm showing an automatic security alert for this terminal. High-clearance military personnel en route to this location. We might have a VIP situation developing." Agent Rodriguez checked his own communication device and saw the same alert. The federal system was tracking a general-level military officer who was moving through the terminal toward their exact location. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Patricia Morgan received a similar alert through airport management channels. Her experience told her that when high-level military personnel appeared unexpectedly at civilian airports, it usually meant someone had made a very serious mistake. Tom Hendricks and Beverly Patterson remained oblivious to the approaching storm. They were still focused on justifying their actions and minimizing their liability. Beverly was explaining to Patricia why their enhanced scrutiny had been necessary and appropriate. "We see this kind of thing all the time, Patricia. People try to use stolen credit cards or fake identification to access first-class amenities. We have to be vigilant about protecting the airline's interests and maintaining security standards." Agent Rodriguez watched the main entrance to the terminal, his training alerting him to look for signs of the approaching VIP. What he saw walking through the sliding glass doors made him understand immediately why the federal tracking system had been activated. General Michael Washington entered the terminal in full-dress uniform, his bearing unmistakably military, his expression focused with the intensity of a combat commander assessing a battlefield. The ribbons on his chest told the story of a distinguished career. The stars on his collar indicated rank that commanded respect from federal agents, airport officials, and airline executives. He moved through the terminal crowds like a force of nature, his destination clear, his purpose unmistakable. Passengers stepped aside instinctively, sensing the presence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Agent Rodriguez turned to his partner with growing understanding. "Agent Thompson, I think we're about to discover why this family was targeted for discrimination." General Michael Washington was 30 seconds from gate C-42, and he was about to transform a routine case of racial profiling into a career-ending crisis for everyone involved. The moment General Michael Washington stepped through the sliding glass doors of Denver International Airport, the digital wildfire that had been smoldering around gate C-42 exploded into a nationwide phenomenon. What had begun as Jennifer Walsh's modest Instagram live stream was about to become the most watched discrimination incident in aviation history. Dr. Keisha Williams, a sociology professor at Howard University with 127,000 Twitter followers, had been monitoring Jennifer's stream when she noticed something that made her heart race. The military alert notifications, the federal tracking systems, the high-security clearance warnings, they all pointed to one conclusion. The woman being harassed wasn't just any traveler. She was connected to someone with serious military authority. Dr. Williams began live tweeting her analysis to her academic network. Military spouse discrimination happening live at Denver Airport. Federal systems tracking high-clearance personnel to this exact location. This is about to become much bigger than airline racism. This is about how we treat military families. Her tweets were immediately picked up by veterans organizations, military family support groups, and civil rights activists. Within minutes, her analysis was being shared across platforms by people who understood the implications of federal security alerts converging on a discrimination incident. Marcus Davis, a Marine veteran with a popular TikTok account focused on military justice issues, discovered Jennifer's stream through Dr. Williams' tweets. He began his own live commentary, his 89,000 followers hanging on every word as he explained the significance of what they were witnessing. "Y'all need to understand something. When federal systems start tracking military personnel to civilian locations, it means someone with serious rank is moving. And if that someone is connected to the family being discriminated against, careers are about to end. Military families deal with enough without being treated like criminals at airports. The convergence of academic analysis, military veteran advocacy, and live witness testimony created a perfect storm of digital attention. The hashtags Black Military Families and Denver Discrimination began trending not just nationally, but internationally, as military families stationed overseas began sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Back at Gate C-42, the crowd had grown to over 100 people. Passengers had abandoned their own boarding processes to witness what everyone could sense was about to be a historic confrontation. Flight attendants from multiple airlines gathered at nearby gates, their phones recording. Airport maintenance workers paused their duties to watch. Even TSA agents from other checkpoints had migrated to the scene. Jennifer Walsh's Instagram stream now showed 47,000 live viewers, a number that was climbing by hundreds every minute. Her phone battery was at 15%, but other witnesses had picked up the streaming duties. At least a dozen different live feeds were broadcasting the scene from multiple angles, ensuring that nothing would be missed or misrepresented. The comment sections across all platforms were moving so fast, they became unreadable blurs of outrage, support, and anticipation. But certain themes emerged consistently: anger at the airline staff, support for Angela and her children, and growing excitement about the approaching military intervention. Robert Chen, an investigative journalist for The Washington Post, had been alerted to the story by his news monitoring algorithms. He immediately recognized the potential significance of military family discrimination being documented in real time. He began making calls to his sources in the Pentagon, the Department of Transportation, and civil rights organizations. His initial thread broke down the legal implications: federal civil rights violations being documented in real time, military family discrimination at civilian airports, high-clearance personnel en route to the incident location. This has all the elements of a story that will trigger congressional oversight and policy changes. At the same time, Sandra Martinez, a producer for CNN's morning show, was coordinating with field crews to get cameras to Denver International Airport. The combination of live streaming, trending hashtags, and the involvement of military personnel had elevated this from a local incident to a national news story. But the most significant digital amplification came from an unexpected source. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking African-American woman in the United States Army, was monitoring military communication channels when she noticed the security alerts for General Washington's movement. She recognized his name immediately. They had served together on joint task forces and shared the experience of being among the few Black senior officers in military leadership. General Hayes began her own Twitter thread from her verified account, lending institutional military authority to the growing digital movement. Watching reports of military family discrimination at Denver Airport. No family should face harassment while serving our country. Military spouses sacrifice just as much as service members. This stops today. Her tweet was retweeted by active duty military personnel, veterans, and military families worldwide. The story had now moved beyond civil rights and into military justice territory. Pentagon officials were being tagged in posts. Congressional representatives who served on military affairs committees were being alerted by their staff. Meanwhile, the technical infrastructure of the airport was struggling to handle the digital attention. The terminal's Wi-Fi network was slowing under the strain of hundreds of people simultaneously streaming, posting, and sharing content. Airport IT staff was scrambling to increase bandwidth capacity while monitoring social media mentions of Denver International Airport, which had spiked from a typical dozen per hour to over 8,000 per hour. Christina Lopez, a flight attendant for Southwest Airlines who was on her break, had been watching the incident unfold from nearby Gate C-38.
She began her own Facebook live stream, her 15,000 followers mostly consisting of other airline employees and frequent travelers who understood the industry dynamics better than casual observers.
What you're seeing here is systematic discrimination that happens every day in aviation. Flight crews see this constantly. Passengers of color being subjected to extra scrutiny, additional verification, and harassment disguised as security protocols. The difference today is that it's being recorded, and the person being targeted apparently has connections that will make sure there are consequences. Her insider perspective resonated with airline employees nationwide, many of whom began sharing their own stories of witnessing discrimination. The hashtag Airline discrimination began trending as current and former aviation workers added their voices to the growing movement. The economic implications were becoming apparent as well. Apex Airlines' stock price was beginning to drop as social media attention translated into negative market sentiment. Travel booking sites were showing increased cancellations for Apex flights as consumers responded to the live-streamed discrimination with immediate boycotts. Financial reporter David Kim from Bloomberg was already drafting an analysis of how social media activism was impacting airline stock prices in real time. Apex Airlines down 3.2% in pre-market trading as discrimination incident goes viral. New paradigm. Corporate reputation damage happens in minutes, not days, when incidents are live-streamed to massive audiences. But perhaps the most powerful digital amplification came from an unexpected demographic: children and teenagers who were watching the streams and seeing Marcus Jr. and Sophia Washington being subjected to adult cruelty. Young people began creating TikTok videos expressing outrage that children were being traumatized by adult discrimination. 15-year-old Maya Johnson from Atlanta created a TikTok that would be viewed 2.3 million times within the next 6 hours. Imagine being 8 years old and watching your mom be treated like a criminal for buying airplane tickets. Imagine being 6 and not understanding why grown-ups are being mean to your family. This is what racism looks like to children. The intersection of child welfare, military family respect, civil rights, and corporate accountability had created a digital perfect storm that was impossible to ignore or contain. Every major news network was now assigning crews to the story. Congressional offices were preparing statements. The Pentagon was monitoring the situation through multiple channels. As General Washington approached the final corridor leading to Gate C-42, the digital audience watching his family's humiliation had reached unprecedented numbers. The combined viewership across all platforms exceeded 200,000 live viewers, with millions more following through social media posts and news alerts. The man walking toward his family's location was unaware that his next words and actions would be witnessed by a global audience hungry for justice. He was unaware that corporate executives in Atlanta were in emergency meetings about their company's imploding reputation. He was unaware that Pentagon officials were briefing senior leadership about a discrimination incident involving one of their most respected commanders. All General Washington knew was that his wife had called for help, his children were scared, and someone was about to discover that the family they had been harassing was under the protection of the United States Army. At precisely 11:47 a.m. Mountain Time, General Michael Washington rounded the final corridor leading to Gate C-42. The moment he came into view, everything changed. The crowd of over 100 witnesses fell silent. The live-stream comments exploded into chaos. TSA agents straightened their posture instinctively. Airport management felt their stomachs drop. General Washington moved through the terminal with the unmistakable bearing of military command. His dress uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with precision that spoke to 3 decades of military excellence. The silver stars on his collar caught the terminal lighting, sending signals that everyone recognized, even if they couldn't interpret the specific rank. But it was his face that told the real story. This was not the expression of a man arriving for a vacation with his family. This was the controlled fury of a combat commander who had discovered his family under attack. Agent Rodriguez was the first official to understand the full scope of what was happening. The federal tracking system had been monitoring General Washington for the past 30 minutes. Now, seeing him approach the exact location where his wife and children were being harassed, he realized he was witnessing the convergence of military authority and civil rights violation. Patricia Morgan, the airport operations manager, felt 28 years of crisis management experience crystallize into a single moment of clarity. She was looking at a general-level officer approaching a scene where his family had been subjected to racial profiling while hundreds of thousands of people watched online. This was going to become the most expensive discrimination case in aviation history. Beverly Patterson was still explaining to Tom Hendricks why their screening procedures had been necessary when she noticed the crowd's sudden silence. She looked up to see a military officer walking directly toward their counter with the focused intensity of someone who had identified his target. Tom Hendricks followed Beverly's gaze and felt his career flash before his eyes. The ribbons on General Washington's uniform told the story of combat service, distinguished leadership, and the kind of security clearance that made civilian authorities nervous. This was not someone who would accept explanations about enhanced screening procedures. Angela Washington saw her husband before anyone else spoke his name. After 15 years of marriage, she could read his expressions like a roadmap. He was maintaining military discipline, but she could see the storm building behind his controlled exterior. She had watched him brief Pentagon officials and negotiate with foreign military leaders. She had never seen him this focused on a civilian target. Marcus Jr. broke free from his mother's protective grip and ran toward his father. "Daddy, these people are being mean to Mama. They won't let us on the airplane." The 8-year-old's words carried across the silent terminal with devastating clarity. General Washington knelt down to embrace his son, his voice gentle, but his eyes never leaving the airline staff behind the counter. "I know, Marcus. Daddy's here now. Everything is going to be okay." The live stream audience was witnessing something unprecedented in the history of social media activism. Jennifer Walsh whispered into her phone, her 52,000 viewers hanging on every word. "That's him. That's the military officer the federal systems were tracking. Look at those ribbons. Look at those stars. This woman's husband is a general in the United States Army." Dr. Keisha Williams was live tweeting her analysis to her academic network, her sociology background helping her interpret the power dynamics unfolding in real time. Military spouse discrimination just became a national security issue. When you harass the family of senior military leadership, you're not just violating civil rights, you're attacking the institutional respect that keeps our armed forces functional. General Washington stood slowly, his 6'2" frame commanding every sightline in the terminal. He walked toward the Apex Airlines counter with measured steps, each footfall echoing with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the controlled power of military command. "I am General Michael Washington, commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division. I understand there has been some confusion about my family's travel arrangements." The words hit Tom Hendricks like physical blows. Commanding officer, 82nd Airborne. These weren't just military credentials. They represented some of the most elite and respected positions in the American Armed Forces. The 82nd Airborne was legendary. Their commanding officers were the kind of people who briefed Congress and advised presidents. Beverly Patterson attempted one last justification, her voice shaking as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "General Washington, we were simply following standard security procedures. Your wife's documentation raised some routine questions that we needed to verify." General Washington's response was delivered with the calm precision of someone who commanded soldiers in combat zones. "My wife presented valid identification, legitimate boarding passes, and appropriate payment documentation. What specific security concerns required 47 minutes of interrogation while my children watched their mother be treated like a criminal?" Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, recognizing that this conversation was about to determine careers and potentially trigger federal investigations. General Washington, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the TSA. I've reviewed your family's documentation. There were no legitimate security concerns. The airline staff's actions appear to have been based on discriminatory profiling rather than established protocols. The terminal had become completely silent, except for the quiet hum of phones recording and the distant sounds of other gates conducting normal business. But Gate C-42 existed in a bubble of tension where everyone understood they were witnessing a defining moment. Patricia Morgan made a decision that would either save her career or end it. She stepped forward and addressed General Washington directly, her voice carrying the authority of airport management but also the humility of someone who recognized a superior force. General Washington, on behalf of Denver International Airport, I offer you and your family a formal apology for the treatment you've received today. This incident does not reflect our values or our commitment to serving all passengers with dignity and respect. General Washington's response revealed the depth of his understanding about institutional discrimination. Ms. Morgan, your apology acknowledges that this incident occurred, but it doesn't address why it occurred. My wife and children were subjected to harassment, not because of security concerns, but because someone decided they didn't look like they belonged in first class. The live stream comments were moving so fast they became unreadable, but certain themes emerged clearly. Military families were sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Veterans were expressing outrage at the treatment of a general's family. Civil rights activists were noting how military authority was finally forcing accountability for routine racism. Marcus Davis, the Marine veteran with the popular TikTok account, was providing real-time analysis to his 94,000 followers. This is what institutional respect looks like. When you disrespect a military family, you're not just attacking individuals, you're attacking the institution that protects our country. This general has earned the right to expect better for his family. Tom Hendricks made one final attempt to salvage his position. General Washington, with all due respect, we have procedures we must follow. We couldn't have known your wife's connection to military leadership. General Washington's reply cut through every excuse and justification with surgical precision. You shouldn't have needed to know my wife's connection to military leadership to treat her with basic human dignity. The fact that my rank is what finally commands your respect proves that your procedures are fundamentally discriminatory. The power shift was complete and devastating. Beverly Patterson was quietly crying behind the counter, understanding that her 15-year career was over. Tom Hendricks was calculating how this incident would affect his pension and benefits. Patricia Morgan was wondering if airport management would survive the federal investigations that were certainly coming. But General Washington wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, not a consumer device, but a military-issue smartphone with encrypted communication capabilities, and made a call that would escalate this incident to the highest levels of government oversight. The number he dialed connected him directly to the Pentagon's Office of Military Family Life Counseling, a department that monitored discrimination against military families and had direct reporting lines to congressional oversight committees. This is General Michael Washington. I need to report a civil rights violation against my family at Denver International Airport. The incident was witnessed by federal agents and documented by multiple live streams with hundreds of thousands of viewers. I'm requesting immediate investigation and congressional oversight. The terminal crowd realized they were witnessing something historic. This wasn't just about one family's bad experience at an airport. This was about systemic discrimination being challenged by someone with the authority to demand institutional change. As General Washington concluded his call and turned back to face the airline staff, everyone present understood that the reckoning was just beginning. Within 15 minutes of General Washington's call to the Pentagon, the terminal at Denver International Airport transformed into what could only be described as a crisis response center. Federal agents who had been monitoring the situation from Washington, D.C., were now coordinating directly with local authorities. Congressional staffers were briefing representatives on military affairs committees. The Department of Transportation was launching an immediate investigation into discriminatory practices at federally regulated airports. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the Pentagon's liaison for military family affairs, was already on a flight from Washington to Denver. Her authority superseded local airport management, TSA supervision, and airline corporate offices. When military families face discrimination, especially families of senior commanders, the response was swift and institutional. At Apex Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta, the emergency board meeting had been in session for 23 minutes. CEO Jonathan Sterling faced a crisis unlike anything in his 30-year aviation career. The live streams had been viewed by over 800,000 people. The hashtag Apex Airlines discrimination was trending in 47 countries. Stock prices had dropped 8% in pre-market trading. Corporate Communications Director Rachel Hayes was coordinating damage control across multiple platforms while simultaneously briefing legal counsel on potential federal violations. This isn't just a customer service failure. This is a civil rights violation against a military family that was documented in real time by hundreds of thousands of witnesses. We're facing federal investigations, congressional oversight, and a boycott movement that's already cost us millions in booking cancellations. Back at Gate C-42, the immediate consequences were unfolding with military precision. General Washington had assumed command of the situation with the quiet authority that comes from leading soldiers in combat zones. His voice carried the weight of institutional power when he addressed Patricia Morgan directly. "Ms. Morgan, I need the names and employee identification numbers of every staff member who participated in the harassment of my family. I need security footage from all angles covering the past 90 minutes. I need written documentation of every procedure that was allegedly followed during this incident." Patricia Morgan understood that cooperation was not optional when dealing with federal investigations triggered by military command authority. "General Washington, we will provide complete documentation within the hour. Our security department is already pulling footage from 14 different camera angles." Tom Hendricks and Beverly Patterson had been escorted to a private office where airport security was documenting their statements. Both were accompanied by union representatives who understood that their clients were facing termination, federal civil rights charges, and potential personal lawsuits. The legal exposure was catastrophic. Beverly attempted to explain her actions to the union representative, but her justifications crumbled under scrutiny. "I was just doing my job. We have procedures for verifying expensive transactions. I couldn't have known she was married to a general." The union representative, Maria Santos, had handled employment cases for 12 years. "Beverly, your job is customer service, not racial profiling. The federal agents have recordings of you making discriminatory comments. The live streams captured you ignoring valid documentation. There's no defense for what happened here." Meanwhile, digital amplification was reaching unprecedented levels. Dr. Pisha Williams had been contacted by CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News for expert commentary on military family discrimination. Her academic analysis was being cited in real-time news coverage across multiple networks. The intersection of military respect, civil rights, and social media documentation has created a perfect storm for institutional accountability. When discrimination against military families is witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people in real time, the response must be immediate and comprehensive. This incident will change how airlines train staff and monitor discriminatory behavior. Jennifer Walsh, whose original Instagram stream had started the digital wildfire, was now being interviewed by airport security, federal agents, and news reporters. Her phone had died after 5 hours of continuous streaming, but dozens of other witnesses had maintained coverage throughout the incident. The complete documentation would serve as evidence in multiple investigations.
Agent Rodriguez was coordinating with TSA headquarters to ensure that the federal response addressed not just this specific incident, but the systemic issues that allowed such discrimination to occur regularly. His report would trigger new training requirements, enhanced monitoring systems, and revised protocols for handling complaints of bias. This incident represents a failure of institutional oversight that extends beyond individual bad actors. TSA needs to examine how discrimination complaints are handled, how staff training addresses implicit bias, and how federal regulations are enforced at the local level. General Washington was simultaneously managing multiple conversations with Pentagon officials, congressional liaisons, and military family advocacy organizations. His secure phone buzzed with messages from fellow commanders who had witnessed the live streams and understood the broader implications for military family treatment. General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking African-American woman in the Army, had issued a statement that was being shared across military networks worldwide. The discrimination witnessed today against the Washington family represents an attack on military values and the sacrifice of service families. The Army stands behind General Washington and his family, and we expect immediate accountability from civilian authorities. The economic consequences were accelerating beyond stock price drops. Major corporations that contracted with Apex Airlines for business travel were reviewing their agreement. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars were being reconsidered by federal agencies that could not be associated with discriminatory practices. The city of Denver was facing its own crisis as international news coverage focused on discrimination at their premier airport. Mayor Rebecca Chen was coordinating with the airport authority, federal regulators, and civil rights organizations to address the institutional failures that had allowed this incident to occur. We cannot have our city represented by images of military families being harassed at our airport. Denver International will implement immediate reforms to prevent discrimination and ensure that all travelers are treated with dignity and respect. At the same time, Congressional Representative Maria Rodriguez, who chaired the House Subcommittee on Military Family Affairs, was drafting legislation that would create federal penalties for discrimination against military families at transportation facilities. The Washington incident would serve as the catalyst for the Military Family Dignity Protection Act. Discrimination against those who serve our country and their families undermines the respect that military service has earned. Federal facilities and federally regulated businesses must be held to the highest standards when serving military families. The legal machinery was also accelerating. Within 2 hours of the initial incident, 3 separate law firms had contacted the Washington family about potential civil rights lawsuits. The documented nature of the discrimination, the federal witness testimony, and the hundreds of thousands of video witnesses created an unprecedented legal case. Attorney David Kim from the Southern Poverty Law Center was already drafting a federal civil rights complaint that would seek not just compensation for the Washington family, but institutional reforms across the aviation industry. This case has the potential to establish legal precedents that protect all travelers from discriminatory treatment, while specifically addressing the unique vulnerabilities of military families. But perhaps the most significant immediate change was happening at airports across the country. Within hours of the Denver incident, airline staff at major hubs were receiving emergency training updates about discriminatory profiling, proper documentation procedures, and the serious consequences of treating passengers differently based on appearance. Airport authorities in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Atlanta were reviewing their own procedures and implementing enhanced monitoring systems to prevent similar incidents. The Washington case was becoming a watershed moment that would reshape how the aviation industry approached customer service and civil rights accountability. As evening fell in Denver, General Washington stood with his family in the VIP lounge that had been provided by desperate airport management. His children were finally calm, having processed the day's events with the resilience that military families develop from frequent relocations and changing circumstances. Angela Washington looked at her husband with the quiet pride of someone who had witnessed true leadership under pressure. "You handled that perfectly. Those children will never forget seeing their father stand up for what's right." General Washington held his family close, understanding that while their personal ordeal was ending, the institutional changes triggered by this day would continue for years. Sometimes it takes a crisis to expose problems that have existed for too long. Today, those problems became too visible to ignore. The systemic changes were just beginning, but the immediate message was clear.
Discrimination against military families would no longer be tolerated, overlooked, or explained away. The full weight of federal authority, public outrage, and institutional accountability was focused on ensuring that what happened to the Washington family would never happen again. 2 years after the incident that would forever be known as the Denver Airport discrimination case, the aviation industry bore little resemblance to the system that had failed the Washington family so catastrophically. The ripple effects of those 90 minutes at Gate C-42 had fundamentally transformed how airlines, airports, and federal agencies approach civil rights, military family protection, and customer service accountability. The Military Family Dignity Protection Act, signed into law 18 months after the incident, established federal criminal penalties for discrimination against military families at transportation facilities. Representative Maria Rodriguez, who championed the legislation through Congress, often referenced the live-streamed harassment of General Washington's children as the catalyst that made comprehensive reform politically inevitable. We watched 8-year-old Marcus Washington ask his mother why adults were being mean to their family. We watched 6-year-old Sophia cling to her mother's dress while strangers questioned their right to fly. No military child should ever again witness their parents being treated as a second-class citizen because someone decided they didn't look like they belonged in first class. The legislation created the Office of Military Family Transportation Rights within the Department of Transportation, with enforcement authority over airlines, airports, rental car agencies, and other federally regulated travel services. Violations carried penalties ranging from individual fines of up to $50,000 to corporate sanctions that could suspend operating licenses. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, who had coordinated the federal response during the initial crisis, was promoted to brigadier general and appointed as the first director of the new office. Her mandate was clear: ensure that the systemic failures exposed by the Washington case were eliminated throughout the American transportation system. The discrimination General Washington's family experienced was not an isolated incident. Our investigations revealed patterns of bias against military families at airports, hotels, and rental facilities across the country. The Washington case gave us the evidence and public support necessary to address problems that had been ignored for decades. Apex Airlines, the company whose employees had triggered the international crisis, underwent the most dramatic transformation in corporate history. CEO Jonathan Sterling was forced to resign within 3 months of the incident. The board of directors implemented what became known as the Sterling Reforms, a comprehensive restructuring of corporate culture that eliminated discriminatory practices through technology, training, and accountability measures. We learned that discrimination thrives in environments where individual judgment overrides standardized procedures. By removing subjective decision-making from customer service interactions, we eliminated the opportunity for bias to influence passenger treatment. Every customer receives identical verification procedures regardless of appearance, background, or perceived social status.
The technological innovations pioneered by Apex Airlines were rapidly adopted throughout the industry as other carriers faced their own discrimination incidents documented by increasingly vigilant passengers. Within 18 months, every major American airline had implemented bias monitoring systems, standardized customer service protocols, and mandatory discrimination prevention training. Denver International Airport became a model for civil rights compliance in transportation facilities worldwide. The terminal where the Washington family had been harassed was renamed the Military Family Honor Concourse, featuring displays honoring the service and sacrifice of military families who face unique challenges while serving their country. Airport Operations Manager Patricia Morgan, who had apologized to General Washington during the initial crisis, spearheaded the development of the Denver Protocol, a comprehensive system for preventing and responding to discrimination at transportation facilities. The protocol was adopted by airports in 43 states and 6 foreign countries. The Washington incident taught us that discrimination is not just morally wrong, it's economically devastating and legally indefensible. Our new protocols ensure that every passenger is treated with dignity while protecting our staff from the career-ending mistakes that occur when bias influences professional judgment. Beverly Patterson and Tom Hendricks, the Apex Airlines employees whose actions had triggered the global crisis, faced different outcomes that illustrated both the consequences of discrimination and the possibility of redemption through genuine accountability. Beverly Patterson was terminated from Apex Airlines and faced federal civil rights charges that resulted in 2 years of probation and community service at veterans organizations. The experience transformed her understanding of privilege, bias, and the impact of discriminatory behavior on families and children. Working with military families showed me the sacrifice that service members and their spouses make for our country. I spent 15 years in customer service thinking I was protecting company interests, but I was actually hurting people whose service protected my freedom. The Washington family's forgiveness allowed me to become someone better than I was. Tom Hendricks chose a different path. Rather than accepting responsibility for his role in the discrimination, he filed wrongful termination lawsuits, appeared on conservative media outlets claiming reverse discrimination, and attempted to profit from his role in the incident. His legal challenges were unsuccessful. His media appearances backfired spectacularly, and his attempts to find employment in customer service were repeatedly unsuccessful. The contrast between Beverly's redemption and Tom's continued denial became a case study in business schools in civil rights training programs nationwide. Corporate responsibility experts use their different outcomes to illustrate how individual responses to accountability determine whether discrimination incidents become learning opportunities or career-ending disasters. Agent Rodriguez, the TSA officer whose professional integrity had provided federal witness testimony during the incident, was promoted to regional supervisor and tasked with implementing new discrimination prevention protocols throughout the transportation security system. His training programs became mandatory for federal agents at airports nationwide. The Washington case demonstrated that federal agents have a responsibility to recognize and document civil rights violations, even when they occur during routine interactions with other agencies. Our testimony helped establish legal precedents that protect passengers from discriminatory treatment while ensuring that federal oversight prevents institutional bias. Jennifer Walsh, whose Instagram livestream had captured the initial discrimination, became an advocate for digital accountability in civil rights enforcement. Her documentation had provided crucial evidence for federal investigations and legal proceedings, demonstrating how social media could serve as a tool for justice rather than just entertainment. Live streaming discrimination incidents creates immediate accountability that traditional complaint systems cannot provide. When hundreds of thousands of people witness injustice in real time, institutions are forced to respond immediately, rather than hoping the incident will be forgotten or ignored. The academic analysis provided by Dr. Keisha Williams during the incident became the foundation for new research on military family discrimination, institutional bias in transportation systems, and the role of social media in civil rights enforcement. Her work influenced policy recommendations adopted by Congress, the Pentagon, and international human rights organizations. The intersection of military service, family sacrifice, and civilian discrimination creates unique vulnerabilities that require specialized legal protections. Military families face challenges that civilian families never encounter, and they deserve recognition and respect that honors their service rather than questioning their worthiness. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was seen in the lives of Marcus Jr. and Sophia Washington, the children who had witnessed their parents facing discrimination and then watched their father's quiet strength transform that injustice into meaningful change. Their experience became a teaching moment for military children worldwide about dignity, resilience, and the power of standing up for what is right. Marcus Jr., now 10 years old,
often spoke at military family events about the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. His childlike clarity cut through adult rationalizations and excuses with devastating effectiveness. When people judge my mom because of how she looks, they're not just being mean to her. They're being mean to our whole family. They're being mean to my dad, who protects our country. They're being mean to kids like me and my sister, who didn't do anything wrong except have parents who look different from what some people expect.
Sophia, now 8, had developed a remarkable ability to recognize unfair treatment and speak up when she witnessed discrimination against other children or families. Her teachers noted that her experience had given her unusual empathy and courage in defending others who were being treated poorly. General Washington continued his military service with enhanced awareness of the civilian challenges faced by military families. His experience became a catalyst for military leadership training programs that addressed family welfare, discrimination prevention, and the intersection of military service with civilian civil rights. Military families sacrifice in ways that civilian families cannot fully understand. When we ask service members to deploy, to relocate, to risk their lives for national defense, we must ensure that their families are treated with the respect and dignity their service has earned. The Denver incident showed us that this respect cannot be assumed. It must be protected through law, policy, and individual accountability. Angela Washington became a national advocate for military spouse rights, speaking at congressional hearings, military family conferences, and corporate diversity training programs. Her quiet dignity during the discrimination incident and her articulate advocacy afterward made her a powerful voice for systemic change. The incident at Denver Airport was not unique to our family. Military spouses face discrimination in employment, housing, education, and daily interactions because people make assumptions about our capabilities, our backgrounds, and our worthiness. My husband's rank should not determine whether my children and I are treated with basic human respect. The economic impact of the Washington case extended far beyond Apex Airlines' initial stock losses. The comprehensive reforms implemented throughout the aviation industry cost billions of dollars, but generated even greater savings by preventing discrimination incidents, improving customer satisfaction, and eliminating the legal liabilities associated with civil rights violations. Industry analyst Rebecca Torres documented the financial transformation in her landmark study, The True Cost of Discrimination: How the Washington Case Reshaped Aviation Economics. Her research showed that discrimination prevention systems had become profit centers rather than compliance expenses, generating customer loyalty and operational efficiency that more than offset implementation costs. The aviation industry learned that treating all customers with dignity is not just morally right, it's economically smart. The technology and training investments required to prevent discrimination generate returns through improved customer satisfaction, reduced legal exposure, and enhanced brand reputation that attracts rather than repels diverse customer bases. International organizations studying American civil rights enforcement often referenced the Washington case as an example of how grassroots digital activism, military institutional authority, and federal oversight could combine to create rapid systemic change. The incident influenced discrimination prevention policies in transportation systems worldwide. The European Union adapted elements of the Military Family Dignity Protection Act for their own armed forces families. The African Union incorporated bias monitoring technologies pioneered by American Airlines into their transportation regulations. The United Nations included the Washington case in human rights training programs for member nations. As the second anniversary of the Denver Airport incident approached, the Washington family reflected on how a single morning of discrimination had transformed into a global movement for civil rights and military family protection. The children who had been traumatized by adult cruelty had grown into advocates for treating everyone with dignity and respect.
General Washington often concluded his speeches about the incident with words that had become a rallying cry for military families and civil rights advocates worldwide. Discrimination ends when good people refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice. Our family's experience was painful, but it became meaningful when it opened doors for others who might face similar treatment. That transformation from victim to victor, from pain to purpose, is available to anyone willing to stand up and demand that all people be treated with the dignity they deserve as human beings. The legacy of 90 minutes at Gate C-42 would continue for generations, ensuring that no family would again face the discrimination that had once seemed routine and acceptable in American transportation systems. The Washington case had proven that individual courage, institutional accountability, and public witness could combine to create justice that protected everyone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.